Everyone believed Dame Judi Dench never held a grudge. For decades, she was Britain's untouchable treasure, the woman who could command Shakespeare into silence and disarm an audience with nothing more than a raised eyebrow. Warm, gracious, unshakable. But behind that elegance was a truth she rarely shared. Now, at 90, Judi Dench has nothing left to prove, no roles to chase, no reputations to protect. And with age came something unexpected: clarity. For the first time, she began speaking openly about the moments that tested her patience and the people who crossed a line she never forgot. These weren't outsiders, they were powerful names, respected actors, celebrated directors, even fellow national treasures. People who dismissed her instincts, mocked her method, or mistook her kindness for weakness. Because what most people never understood was this: Judi Dench could endure pressure. She could navigate towering egos. She could survive the brutality of the stage, but she never forgot disrespect. Some of these stories stayed buried for decades. A world-famous actor who humiliated her in rehearsal, a co-star who treated her like a novice, a director who shut down her instincts in front of an entire crew, a celebrated performer who publicly mocked her age, and one rivalry so quiet it was never spoken of, only felt. 6 moments changed the way she chose her collaborations. 6 names she kept at a careful distance. 6 wounds she never allowed to reopen. And when you hear who they are and what really happened, you'll never watch their work with Judi Dench the same way again. Let's begin with the one that shocked even the British theater world. Number 6. Kenneth Branagh. No one ever imagined that distance would quietly form between Judi Dench and Kenneth Branagh, because to the public they represented one of the most successful creative alliances of modern British theater and cinema. Dench, already a towering presence of stage and screen, stood for classical discipline, restraint, and deep respect for text, while Branagh emerged in the late 1980s as the energetic reformer, the actor-director credited with reintroducing Shakespeare to a mass audience through bold cinematic adaptations. Their early collaborations were celebrated as proof that tradition and reinvention could coexist, and for a time, their professional bond appeared both productive and enduring. Dench admired Branagh's ambition and intelligence, recognizing his ability to energize classical material without trivializing it, while Branagh openly expressed reverence for Dench, frequently citing her as one of the greatest actors of any generation and a formative influence on his understanding of language and performance. Together, they embodied a bridge between eras, and industry observers widely assumed that Dench would remain a recurring presence in Branagh's Shakespearean projects. Yet, as Branagh's career accelerated and his authority as a director solidified, subtle differences in temperament and philosophy began to surface. Dench came from a repertory tradition shaped by collaboration, patience, and quiet authority, where leadership was exercised through listening as much as direction, while Branagh belonged to a generation more comfortable with speed, decisiveness, and singular vision. This contrast was not initially a source of conflict, but over time it created friction. Branagh's growing confidence, fueled by critical acclaim and public attention, pushed him toward firmer control over interpretation and rhythm, while Dench remained committed to an actor's right to shape performance through internal process and experience. In interviews, Dench has often spoken about her belief that acting is a shared act of trust, not an area for dominance, and that the rehearsal room should be a place of exchange rather than assertion. Branagh, by contrast, became known for his clarity of vision and his willingness to make decisive choices quickly, a quality many admired but which occasionally left less room for negotiation. Over time, their working relationship cooled, not because of any single dramatic incident, but because of a gradual shift in balance. Dench valued humility and continuity, while Branagh's rapid ascent encouraged a more authoritative posture, one that placed the director's momentum above prolonged exploration. This change was not publicly acknowledged by either party, and neither ever spoke critically of the other. Dench continued to praise Branagh's intelligence and contribution to Shakespeare on film, while Branagh consistently expressed admiration for Dench's mastery and legacy. Yet noticeably, their collaborations did not continue. Invitations that once seemed inevitable never materialized, and projects moved forward along separate paths. Interviewers observed that Dench rarely referenced Branagh unless directly asked, and when she did, her comments were respectful but reserved, focused on craft rather than personal connection. The warmth that once characterized their partnership was replaced by professional distance. For Dench, this withdrawal was not punitive or emotional, it was principled. She's spoken often about choosing environments that sustain long careers rather than burn them, emphasizing that respect and mutual understanding matter more than prestige or scale. She didn't seek to compete with rising authority, nor did she attempt to preserve partnerships that no longer felt balanced. Branagh, meanwhile, continued to expand his influence, moving between classical adaptations, Hollywood productions, and institutional leadership within British theater. Their divergence reflected not animosity but incompatibility, a recognition that creative alignment depends not only on talent but on shared values about process, power, and pace. In the end, there was no public rupture, no visible feud, and no narrative of betrayal. What remained was a quiet separation shaped by differing ideas of collaboration and respect. Judi Dench simply chose not to revisit a working dynamic that had evolved beyond her comfort, while Kenneth Branagh continued along a trajectory that demanded a different kind of authority. Their names remain linked by history and achievement, but their partnership belongs firmly to an earlier moment, preserved not by nostalgia, but by the silence that followed. A silence chosen, not imposed, by an actor who understood that longevity in the arts often requires knowing when to step away. Number 5. Daniel Day-Lewis. No one ever imagined that Judi Dench would consciously keep her distance from Daniel Day-Lewis, because to the public they stood as two untouchable pillars of British acting, admired across generations, and revered for radically different approaches to the same art. Dench represented precision, clarity, and control, an actor whose authority came from discipline, rhythm, and an unwavering respect for language, while Day-Lewis became the global emblem of total immersion, the performer whose commitment to character erased the boundary between life and role. Though they were never known for a sustained professional partnership, their reputations inevitably invited comparison, and within the industry, the contrast between their philosophies was well understood. Dench has long spoken about acting as a shared endeavor, one rooted in listening, generosity, and timing, where preparation exists not to dominate a scene but to support it, while Day-Lewis's process, documented extensively in interviews and behind-the-scenes accounts, centered on remaining in character for the duration of a production, often isolating himself to protect emotional continuity. Dench never publicly criticized this approach, and in fact consistently acknowledged Day-Lewis as one of the finest actors of his generation, praising his intelligence, discipline, and extraordinary results. But she also made clear in broader discussions about craft that acting should never become an act of emotional withdrawal from the people around you. She believed that performance was not something achieved alone, but something built moment by moment between actors, directors, and crew, and that courtesy, communication, and mutual awareness were not distractions from truth, but prerequisites for it. Over the years, as stories circulated about Day-Lewis refusing to break character on set, addressing colleagues only through the lens of his role, and allowing silence to replace conversation, Dench's position remained measured but firm. She respected commitment, but not at the expense of collaboration. In interviews and conversations about rehearsal, she emphasized the importance of discussing pacing, intention, and structure before filming, arguing that preparation did not dilute emotion but gave it shape, preventing scenes from becoming indulgent or unfocused. For Dench, truth emerged not from chaos but from trust. She spoke often about the necessity of acknowledging one another as people first, actors second, believing that emotional safety on set allowed performances to deepen rather than fracture. While Day-Lewis's extremes were widely admired and often mythologized, Dench's generation carried a different ethic, one formed in repertory theater, where longevity deepened on mutual respect and emotional sustainability. It was within this philosophical divide that distance naturally formed. Dench did not seek out environments governed by intensity alone, nor did she romanticize suffering as a requirement for excellence. She believed that an actor's responsibility extended beyond their own performance to the atmosphere they helped create, and she quietly avoided situations where that balance was absent. Importantly, she never framed this as a personal failing on Day-Lewis's part. Instead, she treated it as a difference in temperament and values, a recognition that brilliance can manifest in incompatible ways. After Day-Lewis's retirement, Dench continued to speak of him with admiration, calling his work remarkable and singular. But she never expressed regret over the lack of closer collaboration. For her, the choice was never about ego or rivalry. It was about self-preservation and principle. She'd spent decades building a career defined not only by excellence, but by consistency, kindness, and respect. And she was unwilling to compromise those foundations, even in the presence of unquestionable genius. With Daniel Day-Lewis, she recognized a talent of rare magnitude, but also a mode of working that demanded a cost she chose not to pay. In the end, there was no rupture, no blacklist, no dramatic rejection, only a quiet boundary drawn by an actor who understood that greatness, however dazzling, should never require the disappearance of human connection. Number 4. Maggie Smith. To the public, Judi Dench and Maggie Smith appeared inseparable. Two national treasures whose shared history seemed immune to strain, photographed laughing together, trading barbs with affectionate ease, and representing the very peak of British theatrical excellence. For decades, they were spoken of as complementary forces. Smith, razor-sharp, mercurial, devastatingly precise. Dench, rounded, generous, quietly authoritative. Their friendship and mutual respect were widely assumed to be unbreakable, forged through years of shared stages, shared peers, and shared understanding of a profession that demanded resilience as much as brilliance. Yet within theater circles, there's long been an acknowledgement that even the strongest professional bonds can cool, not through betrayal or scandal, but through moments where temperament and timing collide. In the late 1980s, when both women were carrying immense professional weight, Dench firmly established as a stabilizing force of British theater. Smith navigating relentless demand, acclaim, and scrutiny, differences in working rhythm became harder to smooth over. Dench approached rehearsal as she always had, with care, patience, and an instinct to question emotional timing and structure, believing that refinement was not an intrusion but an obligation to the text and to fellow actors. Smith, equally committed but temperamentally different, was known for her intolerance of what she perceived as unnecessary interference, particularly when pressure was high and expectations overwhelming. Those who worked with them often remarked that both were perfectionists, but they expressed it differently. Dench through measured inquiry, Smith through decisive certainty. During rehearsals for a major West End production, one that carried enormous expectations simply because of their names, this contrast became visible. What producers anticipated would be effortless brilliance instead demanded negotiation. And as schedules tightened and stress mounted, patience thinned. According to long-circulated industry recollections, a moment arose during a run-through of a pivotal shared scene when Dench paused to raise a question about pacing and emotional balance, a routine practice in her working life and one rooted in her belief that collaboration thrives on dialogue. Smith, reportedly already strained by the cumulative pressure of work and attention, reacted sharply, responding in a way that framed Dench's input not as collegial discussion but as an overstep. Whether the exact phrasing has been embellished over time is less important than what those present consistently recalled. The tone was public, dismissive, and unmistakably final. The room fell quiet. For Dench, the sting was not disagreement. She'd spent her career engaging in rigorous debate, but the setting and implication. It suggested that her precision was a challenge to authority rather than a contribution to shared excellence. From that point on, the atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Smith, by nature armed with formidable wit, leaned more heavily into sharp humor that sometimes edged towards defensiveness, while Dench responded by retreating into professional reserve, maintaining composure without inviting intimacy. On stage, the performances remained exemplary. Neither woman allowed personal tension to erode their work. Backstage, however, the warmth cooled. Colleagues noticed fewer shared conversations, fewer private exchanges, and an increasing formality where ease had once lived. Rumors circulated, not of hostility, but of collision. Two immensely powerful personalities, momentarily unable to yield without feeling diminished. When the production closed, there was no public fallout. Dench thanked the company, conducted herself with her customary grace, and never spoke critically of Smith. In interviews over the years, she continued to praise Smith's talent, intelligence, and contribution to British acting. Always careful, always respectful. Yet something subtle had changed. Projects that might naturally have reunited them did not come to pass. Dench did not pursue opportunities to stand beside Smith again. And when asked about their relationship, her answers were polite, warm even, but carefully measured, lacking the spontaneous affection that had once been evident. To the world, they remained symbols of camaraderie and shared legacy, and in many ways that was true. There was no feud, no rupture, no bitterness carried into public life. But for Judi Dench, respect was the bedrock of collaboration, and once she felt it momentarily slip, especially in front of others, she did not seek to test it again. The choice was quiet, characteristically so. Maggie Smith continued her career with formidable success, celebrated for her brilliance and sharpness. Dench did the same, revered for her steadiness and grace. Their bond was not erased, but it was altered, shaped by a single remembered moment that lingered long after the applause faded. The public saw laughter and legacy. Judi Dench remembered the instant when mutual understanding faltered, and she chose, without drama or accusation, to keep that memory at a respectful distance. Number 3. Steve Coogan. Steve Coogan was not a name anyone would naturally expect to be associated with distance from Judi Dench, because on paper they occupied entirely different orbits of British performance. Dench emerged from classical theater, trained in restraint, emotional precision, and respect for text, while Coogan built his reputation through satire, improvisation, and a distinctly modern comedic voice that thrived on irreverence and subversion. When they were brought together on a high-profile project, the collaboration was framed as an inspired contrast. Dench's gravitas paired with Coogan's sharp wit. Tradition meeting contemporary comedy. Industry observers hoped the tension between their styles would create something fresh and inspiring. Initially, Dench welcomed the challenge. She had worked across genres her entire career and never dismissed comedy as a lesser craft. On the contrary, she often spoke about how difficult and exacting good comedy could be. She respected Coogan's timing, his intelligence, and his ability to reshape material quickly, recognizing that humor often depended on instinct rather than deliberation. What Dench struggled with, however, was not improvisation itself, but an attitude she perceived as dismissive toward the deeper structural work she believed acting required. Dench's approach had always been rooted in understanding emotional logic, motivation, and rhythm, even in lighter material, believing that comedy landed best when grounded in truth rather than irony alone. Coogan, known for pushing against seriousness and puncturing what he viewed as unnecessary solemnity, operated from a different instinct. In rehearsal discussions, he was comfortable reframing scenes rapidly, trimming emotional emphasis, or undercutting dramatic beats in favor of pace and humor. To many, this flexibility was his strength. To Dench, it sometimes felt like an erosion of intention. Over time, the contrast between their working methods became more pronounced. Dench preferred clear structure and thoughtful exploration before filming, while Coogan leaned toward spontaneity and responsiveness in the moment. Neither approach was inherently wrong, but they did not always align. Crew members noted the difference in rhythm. Coogan comfortably filling space with humor and improvisation, Dench quieter, script in hand, waiting for a shared focus to emerge. The atmosphere remained professional, but the ease one might expect from such a pairing never fully materialized. Importantly, there is no public record of overt conflict, raised voices, or personal hostility between them. Dench did not criticize Coogan in interviews, nor did Coogan publicly disparage Dench. What existed instead was a subtle but palpable distance rooted in values rather than personalities. Dench believed that even comedy demanded reverence for craft, that emotional groundwork was not academic indulgence but the spine of performance. Coogan, shaped by tradition that prized speed, irony, and self-awareness, was less inclined to dwell in that territory. For Dench, moments where emotional inquiry was brushed aside, however lightly or humorously, registered as a lack of seriousness about the work itself. She didn't take offense easily, but she was deeply sensitive to anything that framed depth as excess or care as pretension. As the project progressed, Dench adapted outwardly, maintaining her professionalism and delivering her performance with the same discipline that defined her career. But inwardly, she withdrew. She didn't attempt to impose her process, nor did she challenge Coogan directly. Confrontation was never her method. Instead, she observed, endured, and quietly noted that this was not a working environment she would seek again. After the project concluded, Dench spoke of it only in general terms, offering measured, neutral comments when asked, careful not to assign blame or elevate tension where none had been publicly expressed. Coogan, for his part, continued along his trajectory, collaborating with performers whose improvisational instincts matched his own. The absence of future collaborations between them spoke more clearly than any statement might have. For Judi Dench, silence has always been more decisive than criticism. She didn't blacklist, condemn, or dismiss. She simply moved forward, choosing environments aligned with her values. In the end, the distance between Dench and Coogan reflected not a personal feud but a philosophical divide. One believed comedy should sharpen and disrupt seriousness. The other believed seriousness gave comedy its weight. Both succeeded on their own terms, but when brought together, the imbalance lingered. Public saw a bold pairing across generations. Judi Dench remembered a collaboration where the respect she required for the work itself never fully settled, and she chose, quietly and without spectacle, not to return to it. Number 2. Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein was not someone Judi Dench sought out, nor someone she ever publicly aligned herself with. Yet his presence became an unavoidable part of her later film career as Miramax emerged as one of the most powerful forces in prestige cinema during the 1990s and 2000s. To the outside world, their professional relationship appeared cordial, even respectful. Weinstein championed several films in which Dench appeared, most notably projects distributed by Miramax, and he praised her work openly, often describing her as one of the greatest living actors. Awards campaigns bearing his imprint frequently elevated her performances to global attention, and to audiences, the partnership seemed mutually beneficial. But those who understood Judi Dench's values knew that she was never comfortable with the machinery surrounding him. Dench had built her career in theater long before cinema offered her late international fame, and her instincts were shaped by independence, restraint, and a deep distrust of coercion. She'd never relied on power brokers to define her worth, and she resisted environments where authority was exercised through intimidation or manipulation. Weinstein's reputation within the industry was already well known long before public allegations surfaced. Aggressive campaigning, relentless control over publicity, and a belief that success justified pressure. Dench, by contrast, was famously uninterested in awards politics. She valued her privacy, guarded her time, and believed that performance spoke for itself. During award seasons tied to Miramax releases, she participated professionally but remained wary of the tactics employed around her. In interviews, she later spoke broadly, without naming Weinstein at first, about her discomfort with excessive campaigning and with being treated as an asset rather than an artist. What distinguished Dench from many others was not confrontation but boundary setting. She didn't seek power struggles, nor did she publicly challenge Weinstein during the heights of his influence. Instead, she limited access. Colleagues observed that she kept interactions strictly professional, avoided unnecessary meetings, and maintained control over her schedule whenever possible. She did not allow herself to be absorbed into the culture of obligation that surrounded Miramax's awards machine. This distance was not accidental. Dench had spent decades navigating male-dominated institutions and had learned that dignity was often best protected through quiet refusal rather than open conflict. Unlike younger performers or those whose careers depended heavily on Weinstein's favor, Dench possessed something rare: leverage without dependency. She could walk away, and he knew it. In later years, after Weinstein's behavior became public knowledge and allegations of sexual abuse and systemic intimidation surfaced, Dench was among the figures who expressed shock, sadness, and condemnation, while also acknowledging that the industry had long enabled him. Importantly, she did not rush to recast herself as a central figure in his story. nor did she dramatize her proximity to him. Her response was measured, consistent with her lifelong refusal to sensationalize private experiences. She emphasized accountability, supported those who spoke out, and underscored the necessity of structural change within the film industry. Retrospectively, insiders remarked that Dench had always kept Weinstein at arm's length, never allowing him to dominate her professional choices or speak for her career. She worked on projects connected to Miramax, but she never belonged to Weinstein's inner circle, nor did she cultivate his favor. She accepted praise without reciprocating allegiance and participated without surrendering autonomy. In an environment where fear and obligation often silenced resistance, her approach stood out precisely because it was quiet and unyielding. She didn't trust him, and she didn't pretend to. After his fall, Dench never claimed foresight or moral superiority. She didn't rewrite history, but those who knew her understood that she had recognized early on the imbalance of power he wielded and had chosen not to engage with it beyond what professionalism required. For Judi Dench, respect was non-negotiable, and control, masquerading as mentorship, was something she had no patience for. Harvey Weinstein represented a system she endured but never embraced. She didn't defeat him, expose him, or confront him publicly, but she denied him something far rarer – access to her trust. And once withheld, that trust was never offered again. In the end, their association exists only on film credits and press archives. In practice, Judi Dench ensured that her career remained her own, untouched by the fear that governed so many others, proving that resistance does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply refuses to bend. Number 1. Richard Eyre. Few people would ever expect Richard Eyre to sit at the top of Judi Dench's private blacklist. To the public, he represented the very best of British theater, measured, intelligent, and refined. He was a director whose reputation rested on discipline and precision, a man admired for his command of the stage and his ability to extract polished performances from even the most demanding material. Working with him was considered a mark of prestige. Together, Eyre and Dench created performances that critics still reference when discussing the heights of modern British theater. On paper, their collaboration looked ideal. One of the nation's greatest actors paired with one of its most respected directors. Reviews were glowing. Attendance was strong. From the outside, it appeared to be a meeting of equals. But behind that success was a clash so sharp, it quietly ended their partnership and left Dench with a resentment she never disguised again. Not a loud feud, not a public falling out, something colder, something final. The trouble emerged during a prestigious London production in the late 1990s, a production built on reputation and expectation, one that demanded absolute precision. Every moment mattered. Every pause was scrutinized. Dench entered the project as she always did, fully prepared, grounded, and deeply connected to the emotional core of her character. She had spent decades refining an instinctive process, one rooted in listening, discovery, and emotional truth. He arrived with a different philosophy. His process depended on total control. Every beat was mapped before rehearsals even began. Every gesture, every inflection, every silence had been predetermined. The production was a machine, and the actors were expected to move within it flawlessly. For many performers, that structure was comforting. It removed uncertainty. It promised safety. For Dench, it was suffocating. She felt boxed in by a vision that allowed no room for instinct, no space for exploration. What troubled her most was not the strictness itself, but the absence of dialogue. Adjustments were not discussed. Alternatives were not considered. The map had already been drawn, and deviation was treated as disobedience rather than creativity. The breaking point came during a private rehearsal session. Dench suggested altering the pacing of a major monologue. Nothing radical, just a subtle shift. She believed the change would give the scene the emotional weight it deserved, allowing the audience to fully absorb its implications. It was the kind of adjustment she had made countless times over her career, guided by experience and intuition. Eyre shut it down instantly. He didn't question her reasoning. He didn't invite discussion. He didn't even pause. He simply said, "Just follow the map, Judi." The words themselves were simple. The tone was not. It was flat, dismissive, and final. Dench froze, not because he disagreed, but because of how he disagreed. In that moment, she was not being treated as a collaborator or a peer. She was being addressed like an inexperienced apprentice, someone whose instincts were interruptions rather than contributions. A woman who had carried some of Britain's greatest roles was suddenly being asked to silence the very thing that made her exceptional. From that day on, rehearsals became a quiet tug-of-war. Dench searched for the truth in the emotional beats. Eyre insisted on structure. She pushed for nuance. He pushed for symmetry. Their disagreements were never explosive. Voices were never raised. No scenes were made, but the tension was unmistakable, heavy in the room, lingering between notes and silences. Crew members later recalled the way Dench would stand motionless after note sessions, script pressed tightly against her chest, as if weighing how much of herself she was willing to give to a vision that no longer felt collaborative. There was no defiance in her posture, only calculation. When the production ended, critics praised the result. Reviews celebrated its discipline and elegance. From the outside, it looked like a triumph. But Dench made her decision. She stepped back from future projects with Eyre entirely. There's no public criticism, no dramatic fallout, no attempt to explain or justify, just absence. The kind that speaks louder than any statement. Years later, when asked about working with him, she offered short, controlled answers, polite, professional, and stripped of warmth. The world remembered a celebrated partnership. She remembered the moment she was made to feel like an intruder in her own craft. For Judi Dench, that was the one thing she never forgave. The 6 names that never faded. 6 names, 6 moments that quietly reshaped the private world of a woman. The public believed never lost her composure. Judi Dench built her career on discipline, dignity, and a calm authority that carried her through every stage and set. But even she was not immune to ego, arrogance, or the precise moments when respect disappeared. Behind the elegance lived memories that never softened, only clarified with time. Kenneth Branagh, the protege who outgrew his humility. Daniel Day-Lewis, the method actor who shut the world out, including her. Maggie Smith, the colleague whose public sharpness left a lasting fracture. Steve Coogan, the comedian who mistook depth for overthinking. Harvey Weinstein, the producer who believed power outranked integrity. Richard Eyre, the director, treated her instincts as interruptions. Each encounter left a mark. Some disappointed, some wounded, some ended collaborations forever. None was forgotten. For Judi Dench, professionalism was simple. Arrive prepared, respect the work, respect the people, cross that line, and she did not reopen the door. The public saw warmth, wit, and endless patience, a national treasure. Behind the curtain stood something firmer. She wore her standards like armor. She guarded her craft without apology. And when that was dismissed, even once, the relationship rarely survived. These are not stories of scandal. They're lessons in respect and the quiet cost of losing it. Now that the names are known, the question is yours. Which of these surprised you most? And was Judi Dench right to walk away? If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon